As a developer, our job is to handle and manipulate data. But data often comes in some very popular formats like raw data, zeros and ones, and JSON and XML and SQLite database, all of those kinds of data. So in this training, let's talk about how to deal with XML data. XML data often comes from your REST API or from an RSS feed. Now, a lot of you ask me how to do this. So in this training, let's take that on. This is how the app looks like after this training. Very simple. We will take the data from iTunes, from Apple, RSS feed, put that, download all of those XML data into our app. And then we'll learn how to parse the data into foundation object, put that into a table view. So that is what 3 steps that we're going to do. Number 1, download the XML data. Number 2, parse the XML data. And number 3, put that XML data on a table view in iOS. So first step, download your starter project right below this video. I prepare for you a starter project with all the UI, all the source code that I already prepared for you so that we don't have to waste time on that. We just focus on the XML, downloading those stuff. So click the link right below this page. There you goes into my blog, enter your name and email so that I send you the starter project, the complete project, and some awesome trainings for you all. So download the starter project right below this video and let's get started. Alright my friend, let's head over our starter project and let's have a look. In the main.storyboard, I already designed for you some very simple UI that will have the news title, the date created, the publication date of the news item, and then the description, the body of the news. Then inside our XML's parser.script, this is the class. This is the file that has a struct called RSS item. This item has the title, the description, and the publication date, right? And we have a feed parser class. This feed parser class, later on in just a moment, what we're going to do is we'll download XML from a server or a REST API, which one that you want to use, right? Later on in your project, we will make it generic so that you just have to provide a URL and you're good to go. Then what we do next is we'll parse the XML to foundation object, which is our RSS item over here. We have the title, description, and publication date. And very important, we will call back. The caller will provide a closure so that whoever calls this feed parser will use this feed parser, which is a controller, will be able to get these data, will be able to be handed these data and can use those data. Make sense? Alright, so now inside our news table view cell, very simple, we have the outlet to the title, description, and the date. Then finally in the news table view controller, we don't do anything as much. We just have the table view to be estimated row height and then row height, all of those things, and very simple implementation of the table view data source like that, right? So we'll do everything from scratch. So step number 1, let's create our XML parser over here, the feed parser. I'm going to make this thing a subclass of NS object, like that. Then inside here, because we are going to use, now in order to parse XML, we are going to conform to a protocol called XMLParser delegate. What this delegate does is that we are going to use an instance of the XMLParser. Then we'll make this class the delegate of that XMLParser. Then the XMLParser will load up the file, will get your data, your XML data. And then what it does is, over here, I have an example of our RSS feed. We're going to have the feed from Apple. And if you look at this, if I click into one feed, we have, this is the developer's news. It is in XML. Over here, you can prove that because we have the XML version is 1.0. Then I put this thing into a tree viewer, an XML viewer, tree view. And you see that the RSS is this guy, the version here, it is 2.0. Then each of these, if you know about XML, it's pretty much like HTML, right? It has tags, and it has, instead of like in JSON, it has key value pair. Here it has the tag and then the value, right? So here we have the tag item, and then inside this tag item we have the title, we have the link, we have the description, and we have the publication date. How cool is that, right? Now, one very important thing to notice is that the XML parser, because it parses the file, the XML file, so it will read from one line to another like this. And what this XML parser delegate does is it will stop at some point that you tell it to. So for example, it has methods that whenever it stops at one tag like this, it stops at one tag, it will parse it. It will close that method. Then when it reach the closing tag, it will also close another method. Okay? So for example, I have a tag, something like this, feed, right? An XML, something like that. And then I have the close tag, like that. Right, inside this feed, we have the news, and then another one, the close tag, right? And then inside here, we have different item. Here I have one item, and then another item. I'm sorry, the closing tag of the item. And inside here, you have different things. So what this XML parser delegate does is, whenever it reach a opening tag, it will have one method gets called. And that method, if you click over here, it has something like parser the start document. So an XML, it's called a document. This method will get called when you start parsing. And then parser the end document, when you stop parsing, when it's successfully done. It will, or it just ends parsing. It will get this method called. And then it has some method like, if you goes down here, let's see here, this method over here, optional parser did end did start element name with a namespace URI, qualified name, these things. This is when it reach the start, the opening tag, and then when it reach the end tag of that tag or any end tag, it will get called. Now what's interesting is we have this element name, which is the tag, and we could check for it, right? We could check for it, because if it is a legit XML document, then we know that if it reached the starting point of this item, then when it reached the end of another closing tag, it should be this item, right? But the problem is, because we are parsing, it's read one line after another, so we need a way to keep track of that parsing. So every time it reaches the opening and then it reaches the end. So in the between here, we need some way to keep track of that, right? So to do that, I'm going to have a few variables here to keep track of the parsing. Number one, let's have an array, a private var array of RSS items, which is an array of RSS item like this. You see this? The struct. And that is equals, let's say that is an equals to an empty array of RSS item. Cool? Oops, I just delete this. All right. Private is private, like that. Next thing. Next, let's have the current key, the current private var, the current key, or you can do that as tag, but in the XML parser delegate, it's called an element. So let's call that an element. It is an empty string. Let's just put that by default to be an empty string. Next up, let's have a private var called current title, which is a string. Let's put that by default an empty string. Then we have the current description, you know the drill, equals to an empty string, right? Because we have the title, description, and publication date. So we need some variables to keep track of those things. So private var current pub date is a string equals to that, right? And the next thing is that should be good to go. All right. Now, these are not enough, because what happened after we are able to put all of these RSS items into this array? Well, we need a way for our crawler, the one who uses this feed parser, to be able to come back and deal with these data. So to do that, I'm going to have a private var called parser completion handler. This is a closure, and the prototype of this guy, the type of this type, or we call it the prototype, or the signature, is return void like this. Okay, we have some argument that will return void because we don't have anything to return, but inside this argument is an array of RSS item. And because it is a completion handler, the caller of this will give us the implementation of this function, this closure. So we put that as optional. All right. Okay. Now, whenever this current title gets set, the next step, whenever this current title gets set, I'm going to trim on the white space, on the new line space, because there is sometimes that in the description, in the text here, it has the new line, has the spaces that is like not proper for our app. So I'm going to trim that. And to do that, I'm going to use current title equals to the current title dot trimming characters. And then in this trimming character, we need to provide a character set, and that is white spaces and new lines. Cool. And then I'm going to copy this guy, and then whenever this current description gets set to, I'm going to count current description equals to the current description dot trimming characters. And let's do the same for our current pub date. Set current pub date equals to current pub date, like that. Make sense? All right. Now the next thing is, let's call our parse feed completion handler. So let's create this thing. But let's create a function called parse feed, and whoever uses this method just have to provide us a URL with the completion handler of this prototype right here. See that? And this thing will return void because we don't need anything. We don't need the return void, but just like this. You see? So whoever calls this will provide us a URL and will have the chance to give us the completion handler. All right. Now inside here, let's count self.parser completion handler to be this completion handler. Now you may ask, why is it that we don't just like call the completion handler right inside this thing, right? Because if you know about the completion handler in Swift, you can just call completion handler RSS items, an array of RSS items like this inside this, right? But now the problem is that number one, downloading this thing takes
temp. So we need a callback mechanism. That's okay. But another problem is that parsing the XML document, it is not happening inside this thing. Rather than that, we have to rely on the delegate method of this guy to know whenever we done completion handler, we done parsing the document. That's why we need to keep track of this self.parser completion handler. You see that? So now here, because we need to have a URL session and request in order to download data from this URL, so let's have a request to be a URL request with the URL of URL string is URL, like that, right? Next thing, let's have a URL session to be URL session dot shared. Okay, next I'm going to create a task, a data task from the URL session dot data task, and the one that I'm going to use is with the URL request and then completion handler. Then we just have to provide a request, the completion handler, press enter. Let's make some space here so that we can work on this. The data, we got the data and the response and the error, right? Now, inside this, you can do a lot of error checking, but here, let's keep it simple. I'm going just to have the guardlet data to be data. Otherwise, if we does get an error, then I'm going just to print out our error.localized description, and then we are going to return immediately outside of this. If we don't have any if we does have the data, right? If we do have the data and we don't have any error, then let's parse our XML data. To do that, let's have the parser to be XMLParser with data is our data. The XMLParser is a public API in iOS. Pretty cool, huh? Next up, let's tell this parser that, hey parser, I want to be your delegate. And hey parser, start parsing this document. Okay? And then also we need to tell this task that, hey data task, download the data by calling the resume method. You see this? Alright, now let's implement our mark for the XMLParser delegate, like this. There are several methods that we can do. Number one is when we reach the opening tag of an element. That method is parser dot start element with the element name, like that. You see this? The start element with element name. So here we can check. Oh, by the way, we need to keep track of our current element over here. You see this? The private variable. So I'm going to keep track of that. The current element to be our element name, which is this guy. You see? Then we'll check if the current element is an item. And because you see in our XMLParser here, we have an item and then the key or the tag is item. And then we have title, link, and description, right? So if it is an item, then we are going to reset the current title to be an empty string, the current description to be an empty string so that we can use it later on, and the current pub date to be an empty string as well. Alright? Then, as soon as the parser gets the value of an element, now this method gets called, pay attention. This method gets called whenever it reaches this element name. But there's another method that it gets called whenever the parser gets the value of that tag of the element. And that method is parser found characters string, like that. You see? Then when here we can switch on our current element. Switch on the current element like this. And then we can, if it is the case of title, then we can do the current title plus equals that string. Now, this thing over here, the string here is the value, the character inside that, each character inside this key over here. But we have to make sure that it is the key title, and we append the title, the string of the title into this guy. You see? Then if it is the case of description, then we do current description plus equals our string. And finally, if it is the case of pub date, then current pub date plus equals the string. And if it is the case defaults, then let's just break out of this switch. See? All right. Now, these two methods get called whenever the opening tag gets parsed. This method gets called whenever the data inside a tag, a string, a character gets parsed. Then the next method we're going to do is when the parser reaches the closing tag. When the parser reaches the closing tag, what are we going to do? Well, this method will get called parser did an element with the element name. Like that. So the method above here is parser did start element, and then here is did end element, right? So we need to check if the element name equals to an item. Then let's have an RSS item to be an RSS item with the title of the current title, current description, and current pub date, like that, right? Then we need to append this RSS item, self.rss items dot append our RSS item, right? You see? Okay, so pretty much that's it. That's how you parse it. And now after these three methods gets called over and over again, when it reaches the end of the document, we'll have an array of RSS items, right? But now, when it reaches the end of the document, we need to call our completion handler to tell the caller that, hey, we just done parsing the document. That's why you see that over here. That's why you see that over here we have the parser completion handler. We keep track of that, right? So whenever the parser did end document gets called, we're going to call the parser completion handler, and we provided our RSS items. And because it can be nil, so we make an option of chaining. You see? All right, now the last thing inside this parser is that what if we have an error? Well, iOS takes care of you where the parse error occurred. When there's an error occurred, then the parser will call this method. And over here, I'm going to just do error.localize description. But what you can do is that you will put up some error message. Cool. So print parse error dot localize description, like that. You see? All right, now so that is our feed parser. We use an XML parser. Now let's use this feed parser inside our controller. And to do that, in the new state view controller, let's have a private var called RSS items to store an array of RSS item optional, like this. Then inside our view.load, inside the view.load, let's call a method called fetch data. And then it is a private func called fetch data, like that. And then inside this fetch data, I'm going to have a feed parser to be feed parser, like that. Then let's call the feed parser dot parse feed with a URL. Now remember this method, remember the feed parse feed with the URL and completion handler. We put that inside our XML parser, the method we just create, right? So the URL here, you can use this URL that I have for you, https developer.apple.com/news/rss/news.rss. Be careful with the URL, okay? And then the completion handler, whereas we have RSS items. Now things will be so much easier now because we have the RSS items. Then we just have to count self.rss items to be the RSS items, which is this guy, right? Let's see. Okay, now the last thing we do is self.table view. And you know what? Let me reload the section so that we will have animation stuff going on. So self.table view.reload the sections at the section index. So index set with the integer is 0 with the animation is left. You see this? Okay, but now there's a huge problem going on here. The problem is, what is this? A closure, right? The completion handler. Now if you look into this parse feed, all of these closure, it happens in a different queue, is in a different thread of the main queue. And that's good for parsing data, for downloading data, for processing data. But this tail view, self.tailview.reload sections, that is UI code. And by the rule in iOS that you have to implement the UI code on the main queue. And to do that, we are going to count operation queue dot main dot add operation like this. And we just put in over here like that. You see? Okay. Alright. Now, when we have this thing, the tail view will get reload. At that time, let's implement our tail view data source. Number of sections is 1, that's good. Number of rows in the section. So in here, I'm going to guardlets RSS items to be an RSS items. Else, now this guardlets here only means is that, hey, if we do get some RSS item, meaning that this is not nil, then it will implement the rest over here and we can use the RSS items. But if this thing is nil, then this else case will get count. And here we will return 0. Because we're talking about tail view number of rows in the section, right? So if there's no RSS items, there's no row. Otherwise, we'll return RSS items dot count because that's what it is, right? The number of RSS items. Then finally, well, not actually finally, but almost done. We're almost done. So we have the self item at index path. Here, I'm going to cast this cell tail view DQ reusable cell as our news table view cell. Then I'm going to check let the item to be the RSS items at the index path dot item, right? Because it is an array of optionals. So this is RSS items question mark. If we do have that item at this index path, let's set the cell.item to be this item. Now, where is this method? Where is this whole thing? So the news tail view cell here, let's have a var count item is RSS item, like that. Whenever this guy gets the set, what do? Well, we just set these date label, title, all those things. So title label dot text to be the item dot title, description label dot text to be the item dot description, and finally the item dot text. The date label dot text to be the item dot date, publication date, right? All right, now the next thing we'll do is we will tell the tail view that we want to return data, and that is that. All done. Let's run the project for the first time and see how it looks like. Here we go. This is our app. Now it takes some time to download it, and you see we have everything good to go. You see that? We have the news, we have the date, and we have title and the beautiful description. Here we go. You see? Really nice. Now, the next thing let's do, what we'll do next is, you see that all of the description, we put that as the number of the description to be 0, right? But it is like kind of like a lot. So what I am going to do is I want to make that by default 2 lines, just 2 lines or 3 lines. And then whenever the user taps onto the cell, like this, it will expand the cell automatically. So how can we do that? There are 2 things we need to do. Number 1, we make these things 3 lines, and then whenever the user taps onto that, it will expand to all the full description. So in the news tail view cell, opening up the news tail view cell, whenever the description label gets set, we will tell the description label the number of lines to be 3. And now when we run the app, let's see. Okay, we run the app, and boom. See that? We have the number of lines is just 3. Then, when the tail view did select row at index path gets called, did select row at index path gets called, we override this, right? Override. Whenever this thing gets called, we're going to tell the tail view that, hey, tail view, deselect row at index path, animated is true, like this. Then let's get the cell that is selected, tail view dot row at index path. Let cell to be tail view dot cell for row at index path as our news tail view cell. Then, in order to change this, because we want to make sure that we change the number of lines for the description, right? In order to do that, we need to tell the tail view that, hey, tail view, begins updates. Then, all we have to do last is cell dot description label dot number of lines to be, well, we cannot set it right now to be 0, so that it will expand full description. Now, pay attention that the number of lines, if you set it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a specific number, not 0, then it will be those number of lines. But if it is 0, then it will put as the full, as many lines it needs to display the full text. So here, rather than that, we do cell.description label dot number of lines is equals to 0 already, meaning that full description. If it is 0 already, we put that return 3. Otherwise, if it is not 0, return 0. Right? And lastly, we tell the tail view dot end update. Now, if we run the app and see how it looks like. Here we go. It takes some time to download, several reasons. Number 1 is maybe the network, but I think the network is okay. But number 2 is it takes some time to parse the document too. Okay, so now if I click over here and it expands, really nice, Also, there's a huge two problems. Number one, I don't like the gray, it grays out like this. I don't like that. So let me very fast in the cell for row at index path over here. Let's do cell.selection style to be none like this. And if you run it now, here we go, and if you click it, it will not show the gray color, right? But there's a problem. You notice that the first two cells, I just expanded, right? I just expand the first two cells. And then if I scroll up like these, well, these cells, these other news, got also expanded without our permission. We didn't expand these, we just expand the first two cells. What is that? What's the problem? Now let's unexpand this, right? Or I will collapse these two cells, and if we scroll down, it seems like everything is okay. But if I scroll up like this, if I expand the first one, right? And if I goes down here, expand the first one, it goes down, and it seems like this cell over here, they expand the tester limits in test flight. You see this? It's like multiple lines, not three already. Well, what's the problem? The problem is that this method over here, cell for row at index path, this method over here, because the table view cell is reused every time, gets reused, right? Get dequeued for reusable. So this cell here, the first cell, whenever we expand it, then whenever that cell gets reused, then another cell like this will use it, the expansion. You see that? It keeps that reusable of the cell. So we don't want that to happen. In order to do that, we need to keep track of whether the cell is expanding or collapsing. So to do that, I'm going to the cell class over here. Let's have an enum const cell state, like that. And we have two cases. Case number one is expanded, and case number two is collapsed, like this. You see? Then inside our news table view controller, let's store our cell state, which is a private var cell state, which is an array of cell states, like that. You see this? Okay. Next up, whenever we fetch the data, and we append all of these RSS items, remember that we don't know yet how many items are there inside this table view, so we don't know how many cell states. And number two is by default it is collapse, right? But we don't know how many items are there. So whenever we have those items, let's do cell states to be the array with the repeating of .collapse by default, and count is RSS items .count. Okay. All right. Now, when we select the tail view, and index path here, before we end the updates, let's tell the cell states that, hey, this cell state just changed from collapse to expanded, or vice versa. So the cell state here, we need to question mark index path row equals to, if the cell description label text, that number of lines, if it is equals to 0, meaning if the number of lines is equals to 0 currently, it means that it is already expanded. So we are going to return .0 expanded, right? Otherwise, we return collapsed, like this. Okay. Then inside our cell for row at index path, like this, we are going to check if we do get the cell state to be cell state. Oops. Cell state like this. Then let's change the cell description label, the number of lines according to our cell state, dot index path, dot row, right? If it is equals to expanded, right? Now, if it is expanded, if the cell state that we set for this cell is expanded, then we return 0. Otherwise, if it is 0, otherwise we return 4. Okay, now these are just some like logic, so I hope that you will, I know it's a little bit confusing, but you can just reread the code and you understand. It's pretty simple. Okay, so now if I run the project, and hopefully we will have the expansion correctly gets done. Here we go. Click here, it expands. Tap here, it still works, right? But I click here and scroll down and down and down. There's no sound at all. It's still 3 lines.
Alright my friends, so that is XML and how you deal with that, how to parse XML data into your table, into your app. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope that it is helpful for you, it is valuable for you, and it is information and educational for you. If you love this training, please do me 2 favors. Number 1, subscribe to the channel so that every single week I can continue to deliver free training video tutorials for you right here on this channel for free. Number 2, what I would love to do for you is to give you my new tutorial series on how to build real-world applications, apps like Instagram, Facebook Messenger, Nike e-commerce store app. If you would love to do that, just click the link right below this video in the description that you enter your name and email, then I will be happily to send that video series for you all for free. So my friend, download that series right in the description and I see you in the trainings. Until then, go out there every single day of your life, learn new things, craft your ideas and contribute to the world.